What is the avant-garde? We are quick to attribute the label to texts of aesthetic innovation, say a painting that rebuffs conventions of realism, or a poem that foregrounds experimental typesetting. The label has come to encompass anything from wacky font to absurd runway fashion. But such a definition relies upon measuring various degrees of abstraction, and thus risks becoming so broad as to encompass any visual experiment. We also use it as a shorthand for the absurd, the unorthodox, or the initially shocking or unacceptable. For example, Marcel Duchamp's fountain remains a major landmark of the avant-garde canon. The ready-made sculpture defies convention by undermining our insistence on the artist's individual craftsmanship, and it disconcerts us, maybe upsets our sense of propriety, and the presentation of a urinal in a domain where we expect high art. The term avant-garde is also employed as a loose synonym for modernism, those historical movements belonging to the late 19th century and the early 20th century. These include groups such as Dada, Vorticism, and Futurism. We recognize these groups not just by their aesthetic innovations, but by their nonsensical or violent reactions to an increasingly industrial and war-minded society. The story goes that in response to a nonsensical, alienated, and violent world, Dadaists too simply resorted to nonsense. The world didn't make sense. Why should art? Futurists, on the other hand, advocated for war. They saw it as an opportunity for change and renewal. After a car wreck, the author of the Futurist Manifesto imagined himself reborn in the womb of an automobile. He championed new industries and the speed and violence for which they allowed. Scholars of the avant-garde relish the archetype of the isolated, hyper-masculine genius. They foreground artistic depictions of industrial might or experiments with oversized canvases and violent, uncontrolled brushstrokes. This tendency is understandable. The term avant-garde comes from military theory. It evokes an image of onslaught and a hero who unleashes unpredictable violence. But definitions that privilege the image of the isolated genius who assaults his viewer do a disservice to avant-garde artists who devised unconventional art not in order to alienate their audiences, but to bring them into contact with each other and provoke them into conversation and sociability. These arts were not confined to the canvas or page. Avant-garde artists' experiments took place in music, costume, and I will argue, arrangements of furniture and people. What would it mean to view a party as an artistic composition, the hostess as artist? Can we see parallels between the two labors, as Virginia Woolf suggests in a 1925 lecture? My project recovers some of the contributions and the works of authors and artists Virginia Woolf, Gertrude Stein, Baroness Elsa, and Breyer. My project recovers art of modernist circles largely female or queer, and it maintains that the enduring accomplishment of the avant-garde was not the particular literary or artistic styles it invented, but the ensuing manifestation of eclectic, stylized community.